Live from Kakariko Village. Broadcast throughout the Retroverse, transmitted to the real world via a maze of wires connecting a Super Nintendo to a Wii, to a Wi-Fi network, and finally to the internet. The Techno Funk Boy presents the Retro Zoo Super Show. Now here are your hosts, Kai and Steven.
Welcome to the Retro Zoo Super Show, and I am Kai. I am your host for today, and this is the Herzog Zwei Backbeat episode. So if you didn't listen to the last episode, that was our kind of main Herzog Zwei episode where we're digging into the game and really kind of pulling it apart and seeing how it all ticks. But we wanted to swing back around because there's something that we really didn't have time to talk about, but was just this massive part of the game experience that I really don't want y'all to miss. And if we talk about this game without digging into the music at all, then you're not feeling, you know, what this game was like. We've talked a lot about music on this show, and there's some soundtracks that just either draw you in and get you engaged. You know, we're talking about like Final Fantasy soundtracks or Chrono Trigger, and then there's some soundtracks that just get you pumped up and ready to go, and a lot of like action games or shmups will do that, where it will more seek to kind of drive things forward and get things moving, and almost keep the heart rate up, you know, keep you on the edge of your seat. Herzog Zwei is definitely in that category, but we're going to get into a little bit. First of all, we do have a little bit of news. So if y'all going to remember a few episodes, we had the guys from the Roll Initiative webcomic on, and they did mention that they were going to be launching a Kickstarter very, very soon. And that soon has actually come about, and it actually launches today. And so I have not had time, being as this is pre-recorded, I have not had time to really kind of look at the details or not. But Danny was showing me some of the stretch goal ideas and some of the other stuff that's going on with this, and it's looking really, really cool. So this is a Kickstarter to get the Roll Initiative comic, webcomic, into print, and to get that going. If you haven't checked that out yet, I'm gonna link to everything in the show notes page. But if you just remember Roll Initiative webcomic, it's a D&D like adventure story that's just really fantastically told and really a lot of fun. And so I'm excited about the Kickstarter. I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to be accomplished there, and I hope that you will check that out. So I'm going to do my best to get the link to the Kickstarter in the show notes, but I actually write the show notes. I mean, well, look, the podcast goes up at like 2:00 in the morning on Friday, right? And you know, for those of you who are are the early risers, you know that the episode is sitting there waiting for you on Friday morning, and that only happens because I prep everything the night before. Time works a little bit differently, here in Hyrule than it does everywhere else. And sometimes it's faster and sometimes it's slower, depending on if you left the Super Nintendo on or not. And so instead of sending out these episodes, as they're being generated in the Super Nintendo world, which means that, there would be like 30 episodes in a 2-hour period, and then nothing for the next few months while the Super Nintendo's off. We chose instead to like schedule these out, and so getting these prepped a little bit ahead of time is how that ultimately works. And so I'm going to do my best. If Danny has the link prior to the day, then I'm going to put it in the show notes page. But look up, please do check out, if you just look up Roll Initiative, the webcomic, then you're going to find it. You're going to find links to the Kickstarter. I do hope that you will check that out. And I think that the first issue was really, really good, and so I'm really pumped to see the finished product here. So with that out of the way, let's dive back into Herzog Zwei. So if you didn't hear last week's episode, you don't need it for what we're going to talk about here. We went into a lot of the detail on the how the game felt, how the game played, the story, what story they had for the game in last week's episode, but that is not all that important to being able to really appreciate what they're doing with the music. So this came out in Japan in late 89, early 1990 for North America. It was a Sega Genesis game created by Technosoft, and it was. I would think that the best way to describe this is that this is the first real-time strategy game that had the elements in it so that it could actually be called a real-time strategy game and not like a precursor or predecessor to real-time strategy games. And so there are certainly some elements in the game that RTSs would not embrace, or RTSs have done more complicated stuff, and there's stuff in there that's more akin to MOBAs rather than traditional RTSs. But this is a game that we can play, and it's like, yes, this is an RTS, and this is the game that kind of inspired Dune 2, or just Dune in North America, how we got it over here, and which in turn influenced Warcraft, and going forward with all of that stuff. What makes this game kind of unique is that you are not sitting in like an overhead position where you are just directing troops. You are an actual piece on the board. You have to, you're not like just scrolling the window. You are moving your character, and your character can pick up the other pieces and move them, create the strategy for other pieces, but also engage in the fighting directly. And the enemy also has one of these pieces, and it's a jet that can turn into a giant mech robot for ground combat and back and forth. And so you're trying to use this thing in the best possible way while getting your troops moving into position where they can do some real damage, really press on the enemy, give them commands that are going to be appropriate for the goals that you're trying to accomplish in that moment, or long-term goals as you're setting those up. And so there's a lot going on in this game, and it is super, super, super high paced. It's one thing that surprised me about the game is how fast paced it was. And it felt like when I was playing it that I was constantly behind, and I don't say that in a bad way. Look, this is not a game that's going to be like my relaxation game. Never. This is very, very fast-paced, very much an edge-of-your-seat type of game. And what's kind of crazy about that is that it maintains that for a long period of time, because these matches, just like a real RTS, are not quick. Unless you're playing like a StarCraft master and like okay, so like my StarCraft games, if I started playing Steven again on StarCraft, those would be very, very fast games. I understand that, but but most RTSs are not quickly played. And that's definitely this game. It's not quickly played, but it's played at a fast pace. And that's really kind of the intensity of the game, is that it's constantly pushing, and that's it. I think that's definitely an advantage for it, and makes it really, really exciting. One of the things that drives that is the music. So we had a couple of people that were working on this soundtrack, and both of them seem to have been just employed by Technosong. I didn't actually find a lot about them individually. They aren't the big names in video game music history. They seem to have worked a lot on Technosoft games and done quite a few soundtracks. And in this one, they obviously they did the soundtrack for this one. But they aren't a lot of video game name titles that stand out a lot. And I think that's a shame, because I think there's a lot of power in this soundtrack. And from when we started researching the game, everybody was saying it's like, this is really kind of an intense game, and my goodness, the soundtrack. Herzog Zwei soundtrack is just mentioned over and over again as just intense and really spot on for the gameplay. So, as with every time I try to pronounce something in Japanese, I'm going to not do it well. And I do apologize for that. I'm going to do the best I can. Naosuke Arai is one of them, and Tomomi Atani is the other composer. They both worked on the original Herzog game, a few of the Thunder Force games. A lot of their credits are together, and so we see them. They actually both were active for some time, from the late 80s into the late 90s, but don't have just a ton of credits beside their name. And also games that are basically unfamiliar to me. Now, that doesn't actually mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I am someone who has been ignorant on a great many games, including this one, and so just because of that, certainly doesn't mean anything, and I can tell from at least this title that their music was well received and very, very, very appropriate for the game itself. The soundtrack feels like the 80s, and it's fine because it came out in 89, so that's very, very appropriate, right? But it feels like the 80s, and that's also kind of appropriate for this type of game that is so much of a combination of kind of war game, strategy, building tanks and troops and sending them across the landscape, and even the startup screen. I didn't mention this in the last episode, but even the startup screen is just like this detailed rendering of a tank, and it's a tank like tanks today. This isn't some tank from Starship Troopers or something like that. This is a tank, but at the same time, you also have your Transformer jet that swoops in like Starscream and changes into a giant robot to blast people, and that's the type of game this is, and that fits in so nicely with with a lot of the 80s action drive that is so distinct, that is so particular. Where like when you watch an 80s action film, it has a feeling to it, and it was the same thing with a lot of 80s science fiction, which is really just a blend of the two. Is you can watch it and it has a very distinct flavor to it, where you're just feeling like, no other decade would have produced this movie. They would have done something very, very different than the way it was presented, and not necessarily in a bad way. I happen to have a very large soft spot for 80s action, for 80s sci-fi, and going down the list, 80s film is it was what I grew up on, first of all, but that sort of flavor to it is very, very is something I very much enjoy. And you get that feeling like when you're watching like for example, like Neverending Story, when they put like this kind of synth wave background in it with all these great atmospheric synth sounds and stuff like that. It's like no other age would have done that, but it was fine. But it worked because no other age would have made that movie the way it was made. If somebody made Neverending Story today, it would not have been that. It would have been something very, very different. And you can go through like all of the fantasy movies of the age. We're in a post Lord of the Rings climate where everything has to be massive and everything has to be epic, and nobody would do Willow now. The only reason they would do Willow now is to remake Willow. Right, but no one would think about this as a movie and make it in that particular way today. And I feel like that's kind of this sort of game, where if you're sitting there and you got the idea, it's like, we're going to have like this, big kind of war strategy game, but with your character is a transformer, and having kind of these distinct like 80s cartoon / anime type of things that would only exist in these environments to it. That is something that fits so nicely into the 80s sound, and that's exactly what we have here. We have this driving rock music with very distinct synth, sounds either over, or in the background, going that, kind of in that blend that it's again very close to my heart, but is something that we heard all the time in the 80s, but most people don't quite do it that way today. Okay, so we're not going to be able to, in this format, to go through the entire soundtrack. What we're going to do is we're going to play a song over the break just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit. And then when we come back, we're going to tear apart a couple of songs just to kind of get things going. Now, a couple of initial thoughts on this soundtrack is that it's mostly about the drive. It's mostly about it's mostly about the rhythm. The drums and the bass are what drives this soundtrack forward and makes it cool. The melodies are kind of forgettable, but when it comes to when it comes to music like this, that's not nearly as important. The melody is not nearly as important as the rhythm, as the beat, because the beat is what's driving this thing. The beat is what's in control of this song. The beat is what is pushing you as a player forward in your chair, forward in the game, and kind of building up the tension and the intensity of the game. And so the melodies are there, and some of them are even good. But most of them don't matter and are forgettable. And so that is kind of important in going into this, because this is not music that you're going to be humming, when you go to work tomorrow. This is going to be music that's going to get you kind of bobbing your head when you're listening to it and really getting into it. Is like, yes, this is, this is music that gets the blood flowing. And that's the point here. Okay, we are back. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of Back to Square One. Now, so this is one where, when I play it, I'm just going to play a little bit of it, and this is going to be one where you're going to be like, okay, yeah, what was that melody again? And so let's check it out real quick and just kind of feeling out this song before we kind of take it apart a little bit more and just kind of get into the groove of it. All right, so first of all, I just absolutely love that song. That's so cool. We're going to play it 2 more times. The first time is I want to play it without the drums and the bass. Now, what you're going to hear in the song is something that you're going to hear over and over again in the Herzog Zwei soundtrack, is that the melodies are actually, kind of long notes, kind of slow, very, very methodical, very, what am I trying to think of here? It goes at its own pace. And I kind of think, I have to think about, something that I heard Coldplay say when they were asked to describe their music, and they said very, very hard, soft rock. And when you hear the melody of this song, it's like, yeah, that could totally be a soft rock song. That could totally be a soft rock song. But that's not where the song goes, because we just heard it with the drums and the bass, and it's pretty intense. But you're going to hear that over and over again, where the melody often has just these very long notes that it kind of meanders along through the song, doing that to just make sure that the melody is not in the way of the rhythm. This is kind of a trick that that musicians do. When you have something that is really, really intense and really just pushing, and you don't want to have everything doing that, because they get in each other's way and it becomes difficult to figure out what's going on. And so that's often what they're doing here. Is the melody is like, okay, we're going to do a melody that everybody's going to, you can understand. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the point is, we don't want to get into the way of the rhythm. So let's listen to the melody without the drums and bass. And then after that, we're going to listen to the drums and bass without the melody. Now, just the way the program that I'm using, it works. I don't know why. I need to dig into this more, but I think that there's a couple of channels that I'm not able to turn off or on and off using the program that I am using. And so, in that second one, you're actually going to still hear part of the melody, but it's way in the background, and it's not going to distract you from what's going on with the drums and bass. So first of all, no drums and bass. Secondly, all drums and bass. All right, let's get it going. And you can tell what it is that's creating the drive in the song, right? I mean, it's very, very clear especially when you split them apart, what's really going on there. And this is really focused on the drums and bass. That is what is pushing the song forward. That is what is that you're hearing, that is making the blood pump, the heart go a little faster, you to get on the edge of your seat, kind of palm sweating type of gameplay here. It's that rhythm section in here. So I want to play part of Sleight of Hand, and actually we're going to listen to first of all I'll put in a clip so you understand what Sleight of Hand the melody is, but then I want to play after that the rhythm section of that, because It's cool. It's really cool. So first of all, let's play the song itself. Okay, so that's the song. Now you're hearing on that, very, very rock background, but you have that very aggressive synth sound to it. That's a little bit faster than what we heard in Back to Square One. And you also hear that the bass is doing something very, very simple. Since the melody is a little bit more active in this one. At first it's just playing, like that. In the second go round though, I'm gonna play just the drums and bass in this one. In the second cycle though, listen to what the bass starts doing. And it's super cool. And it is one of those just little details because like I honestly, if I had composed this song, I would have had the bass play the exact same thing that the first time, but they change it up a little bit in a very, very cool way. And so we're going to listen to a bit of that again. This is just the drums and bass. And this is kind of what that is sounded like. That's very cool, right? And so, that the first time it was just hitting with the bass drums, were just, bum, 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 bum. But then the second time they start adding more notes, and you also get a little bit more aggressive on the bass drum. That's pushing the song a little bit further, a little bit more, pushing a little bit more intensity into it and getting the song really going. So there are a lot of tracks on the soundtrack. There are a lot of different songs, which is great for such a straightforward game. There's the difference in these levels is just the map. And so to put kind of that kind of detail into the music that you're going to be listening to for a while, because, or maybe I should say, especially if you know what you're doing, this is going to be something that you listen to for some time. These levels are not quickly defeated. And so, very, very great. A lot of great detail in this music. The drive, the energy is really, really wonderful in it. Before we go, I'm gonna jump back to square one, to the song, not to back to square one. But we're gonna exit out a little bit differently. I just want to play the drums. I want to play the drums to this song because they're fantastic, and I always appreciate people who do like really innovative and complex beats in these retro games that really kind of add some flavor to something that is otherwise pretty straightforward. And I think that's very, very cool that they do stuff like that. And so this is a case where I definitely want to highlight that because it's just really, really good. So we're going to exit on that. I really do appreciate you hanging with me, and we will catch you next time.